Okay, we're going to do things a little bit differently today. We're going to start a whole new segment here at PropCoach. Usually we talk directly to real estate agents, real estate negotiators, but now we're going to talk to everyone. We're going to talk about specific terms, jargons, or anything you need to know in understanding a little bit more about the property market. So what are we going to talk about today? About the OPR, the overnight policy rate, and especially why is it important for you? Okay, so the OPR, the overnight policy rate. You've probably heard of it multiple times this year, especially in Malaysia. We talked about it almost 4 times. The Bank Negara already has dropped the overnight policy rate probably already 3 times to 3%, 2.5%, and now it's even below 2%. So why is this important? Why is the Bank Negara doing this? And what has that to do with you? Now let's first talk about the overnight policy rate, or simply said, the OPR. The OPR is basically the minimum interest rate that bank can charge to each other if they borrow money from each other. So why would a bank even borrow money from each other? Because sometimes a bank is lending out too much money, what means that the cash in the bank is not meeting the demand requirements of the Bank Negara. What means that they simply don't have enough money in the bank. What do they do then? They simply go borrow at another bank. And those interest rates are regulated by the central bank, or in this case, the Bank Negara. So when they drop those rates, what happens is banks can simply borrow money at a cheaper rate. And what they eventually hope what happens is that because they can lend cheaper from each other, this will also have a reaction on the market where also their interest rates to the customer also becomes cheaper. Still confused? Okay, fair enough. Let me explain this a little bit better. First, I need to explain to you how do banks actually work. Now, you may not know this, or maybe you do, but banks are like companies. They're like a business. Everything they do is all about profit. They want to make a profit. So how does a bank make a profit? Well, very simple. They do that by the interest rate. They basically borrow you money, and in return for that, they will ask you to pay back a little bit more, what is referred to as the interest rate. Now, sometimes a bank doesn't have enough money in their own bank to borrow you money. So what do you do then? Well, very simple. They also lend that money from another bank. What means lending that money from another bank, that other bank will also charge them an interest rate, right? Because they're also a business. So this interest rate that banks borrow from each other is basically regulated by the Bank Negara, what is called the OPR, the overnight policy rate. So that is the minimum interest rates that bank will charge to each other for the interest rate. You still don't get it, right? Okay, I get it. Maybe it's not completely clear yet. Let me just give you a very crazy example. Imagine this. You are running a nasi lemak store. This is your store and you're doing very well. You're selling a lot of nasi lemak. And your supplier, who's basically selling you the rice, the egg, the fried anchovies, and the sambal, one day is telling you, hey, I'm actually going to sell these supplies to you a little bit cheaper. That's great, right? That means that you can start selling more nasi lemak, right? Because it's becoming cheaper. Now, one day, your nasi lemak store is open and you have a huge queue of people waiting to buy your nasi lemak. And you don't have time to cook any more nasi lemak. So, is there a solution? Yes, there is. You can go to your friend who also owns a nasi lemak store. And you're basically going to him and asking him, hey, can I borrow some nasi lemak for you to sell to my customers? And your friend is saying, I would be happy to borrow you some nasi lemak. But, of course, I would need to charge you for it. Of course, because he's also running a business. But luckily, the supplier has regulated how much your friend is allowed to charge you to buy that nasi lemak from him. And that is the exact same thing what the Bank Negara is doing within the banking system, where they basically give a fixed rate, the OPR, the overnight policy rate, for the minimum interest that banks can charge to each other when they borrow money from each other. Okay, hopefully that makes it more clear. But you must be wondering, what does that have to do with me? I mean, if this is between banks, why am I reading about this in the newspaper? Good question. Well, of course, why the Bank Nagara is doing this is that they want to have a chain reaction from the banks all the way down also to their customers. That if they get charged less in interest, that also this will be charged less in interest within the loans that they give away to their consumers. So you can think of mortgages, personal loans, business loans, anything that has an interest rate. That chain effect going down must have a very positive side for people that want to get more capital in the market. What means if you were thinking of starting a business tomorrow, technically you can start a business cheaper if you need more capital by going to a bank and getting a lower interest rate. So that is the really positive side about it. But also take into account for many people that have a lot of money in their fixed deposits, also that interest rate will be affected. What means that during this time, saving money at a bank in an FD is maybe not so interesting. And that is of course also the whole reason why the Bank Nagara is doing. They don't want you to save too much money. They want you to start spending money. And that is why they make it more attractive by lowering the OPR. So the question now is, of course, why did they lower the OPR so many times? Now, this is actually determined by a committee called the Monetary Policy Committee within the Bank Nagara. This is a group of people that come together and actually decide if the rate stays the same or if they're going to lower the rate. So why would they lower the rate so many times? This all has to do with the market confidence, what is happening in the market. And when you see what is happening today, right now, with this whole COVID crisis, a lot of people get into a fearful situation, or they call this the confidence index of a country. The confidence of a market is basically coming down. What means that people stop spending money, they keep the money, they save the money, and they are actually scared for what is happening in the future. Now, to make sure that we motivate people again to start spending, the Bank Nagara basically starts lowering these rates to actually put more capital back into the market. What means that the bank is now giving you lower interest rates. So let me give you a list right now. That means you can have cheaper personal loans, you can have cheaper mortgages, you can have cheaper business loans. Basically, these interest rates will be across all markets. They're motivating you to basically use this opportunity to borrow money at a cheaper rate and put that capital back into the market again. Now, of course, you must be wondering, how far down can we go? And is it even possible to get at a zero? The answer is yes. Across all nations right now worldwide, all central banks are basically cutting down their interest rates. So that basically means that Malaysia is not the only country in the world that is cutting this down, because of course we are dealing with a global pandemic right now. So lowering the OPR is definitely not something to be worried about. Actually, it's something that can be quite positive for you, because if you were thinking of buying a house or maybe starting a business, this could be your opportunity to actually borrow money at a little cheaper rate. So, can they also increase the OPR? Of course they can. As long as the Bank Nagara can see that the market confidence is coming back, they would want to put the OPR back up again. So lowering and going back up again, you might be wondering, why are they keep moving that? What is their benefit? Where do they win? Where do they lose? That's a good question. Well, at the end of the day, it's all about market spending. And market spending means they want the market to spend money. Because if you spend money, what happens then? Yes, you're right, taxes. Then we are basically paying taxes. Every time you go to a store, you pay taxes. Every time you do a transaction, there are taxes. Anytime there is a business opening and you're employing people, there's income tax, right? So at the end of the day, who benefits the most? The country. Of course, the country needs to keep collecting taxes, because then we can keep running the country. So now at the global pandemic or in a crisis, usually you see that a central bank, in this case the Bank Nagara, will lower interest rates so to keep the market motivating in spending so that they can keep collecting taxes. Okay, great. We have come already very far, and I hope you understand a little bit more about that OPR. But the question is now, so cutting down is good for everyone, right? If the OPR comes down, means it's cheaper to borrow money, basically good for everyone. Well, that's not maybe completely true. There are some big disadvantages of cutting the OPR down too low. One of the biggest one, of course, is, like I said, if you have a lot of money in the bank yourself, in a fixed deposit, also that interest rates goes down a little bit. That means that the interest rate goes down, but if the country's inflation goes up, what basically means that the value of your money is going down, that is not good for you, right? And that is the whole reason why they're cutting that down, so that instead of keeping the money, you start spending that money. But if you still don't feel that you want to spend that money, you already have a house, you already have a car, you already have a business, you already have everything you want, then the money is kind of stuck in your fixed deposit, and it's not doing much for you because the interest rates are low and the company's inflation is going up. So it can also have a disadvantage for people that really don't need to spend money but just want to keep the money in the bank. That money will not do much for you at the lower OPR. On top of that, like I said, the banks are borrowing from each other, right? But since the OPR is low, that also means that their margins are going down. That means that the profit margins for banks is a little bit lower. So sometimes they will not be that keen to borrow too much money out when we are in these times, right? So they will usually increase their terms and conditions, they will increase their procedures, they will increase everything to make it harder for basically the market to borrow money, because they just simply don't want to give too much money out at a very low interest rate. Because like I said, banks are just like companies. They want to make as much money as possible. And if the interest rates is low, the margins are low. So you will see that a lot of banks are simply just cooling down a little bit, waiting until that OPR comes back up again, and then they will start accelerating in approving those loans. So is there any other disadvantage? Of course, yes. Our currency, as the interest rate is dropping, also of course our currency rate is weakening. And now, right now, in a global crisis, that's actually not a very big issue. You know why? Because central banks across the world are cutting down on their interest rates. That means that everybody is doing it, so we are also doing it. But sometimes you're not dealing with a global crisis, you're dealing with a national crisis. What means that the world is not doing it, only the country is doing it. What means that you're weakening yourself in terms of your currency. That means that your currency is actually becoming more weakened, dependent on the dollar. And if it becomes more weakened, this is a bad issue for importers. If you're doing a lot of importing from other countries, you simply need to pay more money to get the products into the country. So importers are not very happy, exporters are a little bit more happy, but let's keep it to a national level. What does this mean for you? Again, just want to say it has positive and negative sides. Now, dealing in a global crisis, basically, it means we all have to deal with this situation as long as we keep things stable. But as you can see, the biggest motivation in cutting down OPRs is all about getting money supply back into the market. So if you're out there today and you're thinking like, hey, I wanted to buy a house, hey, this could be a good time because like I said, you can probably get it at a cheaper rate. At the end of the day, you always need to understand one thing. Borrowing money costs money. Borrowing money costs money. It will never be that money will be for free. But now you have learned today that there are different charges for money. Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're lower. And that all has to do with the OPR, the overnight policy rate. Because once that is dropped down, that will have a chain effect on all the other banks that will drop that down in their personal loans, their business loans, and into their mortgages, into all the things that they charge an interest rate on. At the end of the day, the most important thing that you need to learn today is that OPR does have a direct effect on you. That if you are thinking of any investment, you are thinking of when is it a good time to make an investment. And that is where I want to close today with the super cool quote of Warren Buffett. Be fearful when others are greedy, but be greedy when others are fearful. What means? When you see a lot of fear in the market, that might be the best time for you to start that investment. Buy that house, buy that car, start that business, because you will never get it cheaper as you get it today. Okay guys, thank you so much. That is all what we will be sharing with you today. I hope you really enjoyed it, understanding more about the OPR, and I hope you like our new style here. That only means that if you want to know more about us at PropCoach, or you want to learn more about what is happening in the property market, just subscribe here to our YouTube channel and feel free to type in a comment box any topic you want to learn. We will read those comments and we will use that for our next videos. For now, I want to thank you for watching and hope to see you next time. Bye!